You're listening to My Grito Podcast Network, celebrating the culture of Chicanos and Latinos one story and voice at a time. Listen to more My Grito Podcast Network shows over at mygrito.net. Connect on social, on Instagram and Facebook at My Grito, the My Grito Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone. This is the Dark Prince of Comics, T, also known in the mortal world as Dustin Garcia. We are here in the buzz of the mind buzz, the hive of all hives. The world and the elements together in the great void to which stares back at you. Sequential art and comic books. I'm so excited.
Dustin, what's up, man?
Oh, you know, up and down, here and there, everywhere. But I'm here. And it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. And so just want to thank you for having me. First off,
no worries.
you know,
Thanks for coming out and doing this, dude. Appreciate
absolutely. It's an honor.
We're finally here. We're doing it.
Yeah, it feels good.
Yeah, thanks for coming out, dude. We've been talking about this for a minute, so it's been anticipation from both sides.
Anticipation, my favorite verb.
We're a little bit before we were hit the record button. We're talking about how we fact check, and I had to fact check. Okay, so Amber was telling me about somebody that had a master's degree in comic books, and that's something we have to just look up.
Well, what kind of jerk would say that without meaning it? I mean,
yeah, right. It's like so off the wall that it's not even in somebody's imagination.
I mean, comics and MFAs. I mean, come on, the two just don't mix.
So what's a MFA?
An MFA is an abbreviation for Masters of Fine Arts.
Okay.
So if you liked going to college, you can go to college again for 4 more years and get more credentials about your legitimacy in academia. And that's what a master's does. It also increases your chances of getting particular jobs in the education field and other opportunities, probably by a marginal percentage. So, yeah, so I'm going to talk like that when I talk about academics.
Marginal. We need to get him a pipe and
oh my god,
a fireplace. Where did the fireplace come from? I don't know. He just came in and there was an automatic fireplace.
I mean, fireplace makes sense with that voice. I mean, all I need is a robe and some, you know, like sock guards with like going up to my knees and stuff with my pretentious accent.
Yeah,
my New England accent. Yes.
I did not know that you can get a master's degree in comic books.
I didn't either.
Is it comic or comic books?
Comics.
Explain it.
Yeah.
Explain it to me.
So so the way that it went about is one of my friends, shout out to Brina Nunez and my very good friend Lawrence Lindell, who just recently got included to one of the biggest and one of the first LGBTQ comic book documentaries, No Straight Lines. So we were living all in the Bay Area at the time. I was living in Berkeley, and I had known about the California College of the Arts, but two of my friends both listed into the school around 2017. And I was very interested in going, and you know, a former partner of mine had really pushed me to do it, and I was so reluctant at first, but I went, and I found out that you can get an MFA in comics, and I always was like interested in getting an MFA since I have a bachelor's degree in it too. But when I found out you can get an MFA and doing research on what, you know, some MFA programs look like, you know, I was able to really get a really great opportunity to like get a chance to focus. The school is called CCA, California College of the Arts. And their comics division program is very special and unique since it has a lot of people who are also established artists, but also established academics in the field scholar research of comic books, graphic novels, and a new field that's emerging in the comic book studies world, which is graphic medicine. So, and I was there for 2 years because they have a really great residency program there that's low residency. So you go for a summer and then you go for the rest of the year remotely wherever you are. So you have that kind of space to create, but also interact with professionals and giving you mentoring and stuff. So it's an excellent program. So yeah, that's how I got into it. And it was a life-changing experience, quite honestly. I mean, I was able to really, for the first time in my life, like focus full time on creating the stories and exploring the art that I wanted to create. Since, like, you know, my BFA program at the time was a little bit complex. Art school I have a very love-hate relationship with it, and this totally redeemed it. So it was a really great experience. Yeah.
So you said medical graphic
medicine.
Graphic medicine.
Yeah. So graphic medicine is a new field of study that is being recognized in the academia world. Comic books have kind of been seen as this kind of, like throwaway 99 cents trash, type of art form by, most masses until most recently. It's kind of fluctuated as an art form, but it's never been really recognized until recently in the last, I would say, like 10 years in, academia. It's been put out there and talked about, but it hasn't been really respected to the level, because now there's direct evidence showing that comic books have not only mental health benefits, but also benefits to which doctors and medical workers, with their direct relationships with patients, and having patients draw and articulate their experiences in the hospital or what they're experiencing medically, to have more of an empathetic approach and direct connection with their patients, so they better understand what's going on in their mind, what they're experiencing. And there's a book on this too that anyone can read online. It's on Amazon, Graphic Medicine Manifesto. Highly recommend it.
Can you pull that up? What do you have up there? What do you have up right there right now?
I have the California College of Arts, right?
Yeah.
This is the program that
this is the school. The MFA program is the comics program for CCA, so the MFA in comics, which is great though, because they're starting to have a BFA program for comics as well, since the MFA program was so successful. Since I would say about, if not all, but like 90% of the people that I went to school with have all been published or established somehow, including myself.
Wow.
So yeah. It's pretty sweet. There it is right there. So yeah, no, and it's cool. Our pamphlet was drawn by one of our former students. And so the pamphlet's actually fully illustrated and tells you all the information when you get there.
Oh, that's awesome, dude.
And yeah, and there's like a showcase of all the work that's been done. My homie Lawrence is on the very right there.
This one?
Yeah, that one right there. Shout out to him. That's a brother of mine, known since we went to school together. Actually, we graduated in the same class. So yeah, we graduated the same year too when we were in our bachelor's program. So yeah, but yeah, there's such a variety of stuff in this program. It's very much centered on personal expression, really experimental stuff. We even learned how to do coding and doing digital approaches, techniques, and stuff, to kind of just find out new experimental ways of telling stories online, or telling stories through, current media, since comics are able to be translated in most any platform technologically outside of print, though I still love print. I do think that there's so much room for digital comics. So yeah.
What was the book called that you said?
The book is called Graphic Medicine. Yes. So yeah, as I said, it's an incredible book. They're definitely deep in the academic jargon. But if you're able to see past that, I really encourage anyone who would like to know a little bit more about what comic books are doing for a lot of people in the mental health and medical field, and why I think it's relevant. So it's a relatively small but growing movement of artists and intellectuals really trying to, put comics in a place to which they can become more, culturally recognized as a very powerful art form, since they've had a very fluctuated, troubled history as an art form, especially in the United States. So, yeah, I hope this proves to you that I have an MFA.
We're getting there.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Stay skeptical, folks.
Dude, so through this program, did you learn like the history of comics?
Yeah, no. So I'm a big nerd in general, as you probably would have guessed. And just, doing the art thing for so long. But comics are, a history that I've been studying independently since I, started, getting into them deeply and more personally in, high school. So like high school was the years to which I really started recognizing it as a important medium for me to like really express my not just my creative ideas, but my kind of creating a reflection of my inner experiences emotionally, and kind of putting that in a story. So when I became interested in art form, like anything I get interested in, I want to dissect it as much as possible and learn as much as possible.
Absolutely.
So I've been studying comic history since I was like 16 years old, just on my own.
Okay.
And when I went to college, I was able to really they had a great library, because the people at the time who were running the library in my undergrad program, had a really good long collection of comics, but not just like mainstream Marvel, DC superhero stuff. They had like independent stuff, graphic novels, historical stuff, just a good variety of stuff from even Japan and Europe. And there's been more documentaries and books, studying the field of the history of comics and its relevance, because it's had such a cultural impact, not only in the art form, in the creative spaces, but also culturally, as American culture has has evolved over the last century. So yeah. But to answer the question, we did get a really good deep dive into comic history in the MFA program. And I was really nerding out because I was able to add like little footnotes with my professors. And it's like, oh, did you know that this artist also did this? Did you know this guy also did this? So I was like an unofficial assistant professor. So, I mean, I was just totally nerding out, and it was great because we did a little action where at the end of our first semester, somebody writes like a compliment to you with a drawing, and someone told me, I can't believe how much you know about comic book history.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that would be my credential, I suppose.
What was the first comic that you picked up? Do you remember that?
See, that question is always hard for me to answer because I don't remember. I can go back as far as when I was an infant and wearing Batman underwear and Spider-Man t-shirts, because I'm sure you might remember too, like in the 90s, it was a huge, like, speculation industry at that time. Independent comic books were becoming more mainstream with, companies like Image, leaving DC, and, you got Mark Silvestri and, all the, big boys of that early era doing all this wild stuff with Image Comics, and that would turn into Top Cow Comics. And then, there was just all these smaller, like smaller companies that becoming huge and making tons of money because of the speculative market until the crash in, around 94, I would say. But
wait, what crash?
Well, there was a comic book crash in the 90s because of the speculative bubble, because there was just, so much content being made, different types of content. And what ends up happening.
Comics books got oversaturated?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because there was a time where, I remember very distinctly when I was getting into comics, a lot of it was going on around the time where they were everywhere. I mean, comic books around the 80s had kind of this, revival because of, what was called the Comics Code, which, made comic books really crummy for about like half a century in the United States. Yeah. But by the time you hit the 80s, people stopped caring, and you get a more, variety of, different types of, availability of comic books that was unprecedented, so comic books are literally in markets, like grocery stores, 7-Elevens, there's more comic book shops popping up. And, as a kid, you would see those things all the time, and I would just pick them up, you know what I mean? And, and another funnier, aspect of that, being raised in a religious family, I also read religious comic books.
Really? They have those? Oh, yeah, I bet.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen them.
There's Veggie Tales. There's all those things.
What's
So.
one of them called?
So the only one that matters to me is one of the most problematic ones. So there's my main man, Jack Chick. So Jack Chick is a very fascinating but extremely problematic creator. So he was this lunatic that was born in the United States, but he was an extreme, he was part of this very like weird subsidiary extremist, fringe, form of religious comics, based on his like unshakable faith and very, binary way of seeing morality. I mean, this guy, anything that wasn't anything he liked, he put it in his books and made it part of a conspiracy. But you've probably seen them. They're these like little comic books that a lot of, Christians pass out during, Halloween, and they have like warning, the Halloween's a demonic, type of event or religious type of thing. But the fascinating thing about these comics is though they've been recognized by the Southern Poverty Law Center as being a hate group because they absolutely they're hated. They but the thing that's fascinating about these books, the creator's long passed, and so did his assistant, but he had a very interesting life though, because one of my favorite things about reading about him, because I did a presentation for him when I was in my MFA program, just about like, because these were comic books I was only allowed to read at the time, I was allowed to read a lot of stuff, but like things like Spawn were like considered demonic. Yeah. So I had to like read these, but these are far worse because in my opinion, they showcase a lot of these narratives that the guy creates as being real things that happen to people, like they're true events or something. So they're very well made, but they're just the worst, problematic, hateful, religious comics and I've ever seen. But what's crazy is they're translated in hundreds of different languages. They're one of the most most popular comic books out there and have made a lot of money, and a lot of churches still use them, which is very interesting. But like those were like early memories I had of reading comics, and that's what got me interested in reading comics. But I would say, there's two moments that I would say are probably the most pivotal for me. So around the time when I was in 6th grade in the early 2000s, bookstores like Barnes and Noble started doing mass purchases and, imports of manga from Japan.
Oh, okay.
And at this time too, there was a lot of archival books of like past popular comic books of the 50s and 60s coming out. Things like Garfield I read very prominently, and things like Calvin and Hobbes were like a huge deal for me. And the Sunday strips were something I dived into a lot in the Sunday newspaper, since like, there were big paper and stuff. But when I started reading manga in 6th grade, it kind of just took me to a whole nother place, because it was around the time in middle school when I was really getting into like anime, Japanese culture, and manga had just this very different look to it. It's very different how they approach the stories, the content, the way it's drawn. In my opinion, at that time, I mean, this is such a 6th grader thing, is like the mindset I had at the time was like, Japanese comics are superior to Western comics. Japan all the way, and that's how I felt for a long time. But that changed, when I hit sophomore year, and I was introduced to what I consider two of the most important books I ever read growing up, which is Johnny the Homicidal Maniac by Jonan Vasquez, who's also the creator of Invader Zim. He was actually a comic book artist before he got a show pitched with Nickelodeon. And the other book would be James O'Barr, The Crow, which was the graphic novel the movie was inspired by, with Brandon Lee, rest in peace. Those two books were very important to me because they were the first comics that had what I could see clearly as the author having their heart and soul in the story and the character. You could tell it was inspired by real experiences, at least emotionally. And I had never seen anything like that at the time,
The Mind Buzz is powered by Mind Buzz Media. Mind Buzz Media is an on-site video and audio podcast production company. Have you ever thought about starting your own video and audio podcast? Or do you have an existing podcast that you want to take to the next level? Mind Buzz Media brings a professional podcast studio to you. Visit mindbuzz.org for more. Wait, hold on. You're telling me that The Crow, that's a manga?
No, excuse me. So I jumped from manga. So manga was something I got in my middle school, and then The Crow was something I got later on into when I was in high school.
Okay,
so
I see.
My affinity for Western comics re-blossomed because I by that point I was kind of disinterested in superhero stuff because I found it to be very formulaic and uninteresting. Inspiring here and there, especially with books like Watchmen and some other stuff like All-Star Superman and even Batman, some of the Batman stuff that was made in the 80s and, like The Dark Knight Returns. But what I liked about this was the most important thing of it wasn't just the reflection that these artists were creating content that was very personal. It was also the fact that there was independent artists out there doing their own thing and creating their own stories, and they were able to publish their visions. You know what I mean? For the most part, unfiltered, unapologetically, and uncompromised, as the great Ed Piskor would say, outlaw comics. Yeah.
So are there different types of comics, like genres, I guess you can say?
It's always had different types of mediums as far genres as far back as the early 20th century. I mean, one of the things people forget is that there was a time where superheroes weren't really the centerpiece of comic book culture. Before that, in the early, as early as the early 20th century, strips were the thing. I mean, that's what was printed, because you're talking about a time where print media was the number one form of entertainment because it was the most accessible, it was the most affordable for everyday people. The film Citizen Kane, the character that's based on, William Foster Kane was based on William Randolph Hearst, which was this, to put it lightly, a lunatic from that had a very big newspaper in San Francisco. And he published a lot of what would be considered groundbreaking comic book material because his stuff was the most popular, because he was able to make a newspaper that was affordable. But he was also one of the earliest innovators of something we would call yellow journalism, which was a prelude to what we would call fake news to this day. So it's just interesting. Comics have always been in the forefront of counterculture, early culture, pop culture as well. And, strips were the thing. And it wasn't until like around the 30s when you start seeing superheroes take the place in the center stage.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Like,
Yeah.
when did superhero and Superman, like superheroes like Superman come into
I would say like, from what
the
I've
scene?
so the research that I've done, there's a couple things that you could argue were early superhero stuff. Japan has been said to make some of the first, so-called superhero stuff. I believe there's a character called the Golden Skull that predates Superman, but at least I think 10 years. I don't quote me on that, but I know that the Golden Skull at least predates Superman. But
Can we look that up? I gotta see that.
yeah,
So,
so
Superman and Golden Skull.
the
you
Golden
said?
Skull, yeah. So the Golden Skull, I believe, is the name. There's a Japanese name for it right there, but so it's not Superman the Golden Skull. It's just called the Golden Skull. So the Golden Skull was a Japanese character created at that time. So, but comics didn't really start bringing superheroes into the forefront until around the early 1930s when Simon and Joe Shuster, I believe, created the first superhero comic. So that's not the correct one. You would probably want to put manga after that. Okay. Yeah. So this character in particular, from what I understand, so yeah, there he is right there. That's one of his appearances and stuff. And so yeah, the one right there on the bottom row where he's like looking up and stuff. So
Go to all because I want to see the the date.
Oh, you know what? I think I might not be the Golden Skull. It might be the Golden Bat. Try that. Excuse me.
The golden bat.
Yeah, the Golden Bat. I got so much. See, this is what happens when you're like such a nerd. You got all these different names and you get all these little details wrong, and then everyone starts questioning your credibility.
The golden bat
You could do the anime, but it's originally a manga. I would say look for the manga if you can. This character was very popular at his time. He was originally
1947.
Yeah, 1947, which is when I believe later stuff came in. But Superman came around the early 30s, but he predates Superman, I think, substantially. But yeah, he was the type of character that would fight, giant monsters. He would fly around and protect people. And
Is it this one?
that's not that one.
No,
it's
that's
probably
Gold-
the bottom left one
my
right there. So
That says Golden Batman.
yeah, to the
Golden
left
Batman.
right there. So the very left image. So we don't have any images of
He
him.
looks pretty cool.
Yeah, he's a cool character. I mean, he was like, he's a demon that comes back to basically bring order to the world, and very much in the same vein of like superhero. But
Yeah.
he's an interesting character. He's almost like an anti-hero, and he's an important character in comic book history.
So this is what 1947. This guy came
I would
out.
say earlier than that. I'm not quite sure on the exact date, but I believe, his appearance right there in 1930. And Superman, I believe, didn't make an appearance until 1932.
Oh yeah, first
Okay.
appearance. 1930.
Yes.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So if not before, around almost the exact same time.
Okay, let's look up Superman now.
Alrighty. This is where we test the prince's darkness power.
What are we looking up for Superman?
Superman, first issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I believe it's Action Comics. I can't remember the number. Yeah, first issue. First appearance, you could probably put either one of those two. But yeah, I mean, there's a very deep history of comic books, in the human experience. 1938. So
Okay.
predates him, and
Absolutely.
the Golden Bat, is one of the first. I mean, he flies around, he has superpowers, he fights monsters.
And this is from Japan. This was
is
a character from.
straight from Japan. I mean, Japan has a very different history of comics because after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan had to really rebuild its entire economy from the ground up. The term escapes me, but there were these popular types of activities that were going on at the time. One of my favorite artists who did this really great manga called Barefoot Gen, which is an account of his. He was actually a survivor of the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, I believe, or not, one of the two. He was saved by an 8-foot wall, but he used to see that this time in the early, post-war Japan, there was a lot of random people coming around with these like different types of print slides. And basically these would be early alludes to things like anime and early manga, which would influence people like Osamu Tezuka, who grew up in early Imperial Japan and post-war Japan, and they would watch these and be inspired to draw stories based on these random storytellers that would just come with wagons and these like images they would insert on these blocks and like change them with the story and do voice acting and performances. So comics are a huge part of just, culture and imagination in the public. And it's especially now, it's become so much more socially acceptable than it was, 40 years ago, so I can go on forever about it.
I'm like, I feel like I'm on a TED Talk. This is great.
Yeah.
When I decided to choose comics as my medium, I only had one thing in mind. So yeah, as you could see, I mean, I could go on forever about, comics and just their importance in my life and importance in a lot of my friends and people that I think it's a bridge to literacy. It stimulates the part of a brain, I think, that really encourages in between of imagination that is provided and imagination that is interpreted, which I think is where the literary aspect of it comes from. So yeah.
Keep going.
Oh my goodness! Keep going. Shoot, man.
No. When did you decide that you're like, you know what? I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna actually go to school and get an MFA in comics.
Yeah. Well, 16. When I was 16, after reading, John the Homicidal Maniac and The Crow, I just realized like this is what I want to do for my life. Like, there's no other medium and art form that I love more. It was just something so accessible and personal that I was able to really just like take home. And I already knew from, a teen that I wanted to go to art school and just become a professional artist or, and tell my own stories, and
How supportive was your family? Like when you told them that you wanted to do that?
Yeah. So, I have to say, shout out to my parents, for always being supportive of what I do. My parents come from a different generation. I'm a first generation Latinx person, or Latine or Latino, whatever you want to call it. My dad's a Cuban refugee. My mom was born here, but, grew up in a Nicaraguan family in Pacoima, and my dad grew up in Bell Gardens, and basically in the 70s and stuff. And, as different as their experience were, as hardworking parents, my opportunity to just be able to be accepted as an artist, I think is something that I would definitely consider, a privilege and is not very common, and I'm very grateful for that. And they've always been supportive. It's changed back and forth over the years, obviously, because, as you grow older, different responsibilities come up and, certain things are perceived a certain way. But at the end of the day, I've always been supported, not only by my parents, but my community to continue to do the things I love to do. And part of that has been also, learning to become a teacher in that passion of, creativity, but also sharing the wisdom, passing the baton, if you will, to create that accessibility and excitement for the next generation.
I was just going to ask you about that. Like, how do you, people don't know, right? But we know, like, you teach my nephew, right?
Yeah.
Books and all
Shout out to Mateo. What's up?
But how different, because I think of myself back in the 90s, and we had certain shows and they were coming up and everything, but I feel like kids now have like this like huge range of like just things that they can watch and see and do and everything. Like how do you think it's like so different now teaching a kid like then versus, obviously you didn't teach anyone back in the 90s, but you know what I mean? Like, do you think that these kids' creativities are a lot more, what's the word I want to say? Like, do you think they're more creative now because they see so much, or do you think it kind of seeing so much kind of blocks creativity?
I think that's a good question. I think that it's not a matter of what, I think it's a matter of how, which is where, my teacher mind comes in, because I grew up in a generation to which, technology was becoming much more, dense with content. I come from the era where YouTube was just starting. I was a teenager when the internet was like at 2.0, and there was like finally things like streaming content. You could read stuff online that was much more high definition in images than you could in the early 90s with dial-up. And I think that even then there was still this oversaturation of content but it's nowhere near what it is now, where we grew up in a generation where we went outside and did stuff outside of technology. Kids now have grown up with the internet as being a fact of life. Before, it was something that was new, introduced to us. But now, with the advent of technology creating this accessibility, I think that it's not a matter of what is accessible. It's a matter of what are we teaching our kids to do with this content, and what are we using it for? Because this content is made for one purpose. It's to be consumed. It's to be watched. It's for your attention, and your eyeballs equals money. So when I teach my students, I think about less about how are they being creative with the content that they're watching, and try to figure out how can we take what content they're watching and use it as inspiration for them to create their own stories. And the way I go about that is by creating it in a way that utilizes the technology available today, which is much more accessible than it was when I was growing up. And finding ways to make it simple and, and accessible for kids to kind of articulate their ideas. And I think that comics have a really great way of bridging kids to kind of really diving into their own imaginations and developing their own kind of creative vocabulary. And that can come from a different, stream of different inspirations. I mean, I would be lying if I didn't know as much as I did because of all the cartoons and comic books I consumed growing up. The difference is I was shown through mentors and teachers and different people in my life of what to do with that knowledge and that wisdom and that experience and that, media that's forever burned in my memory. You know what I mean? So,
so I guess like taking today's whatever YouTube and using it as a tool for your own creativity.
Yeah, but also not only using it as a tool, but making sure that kids know other forms of expression that's outside of, the thumbs on the screen. I think that nothing beats, using a good old ink pen or brush and making a mess. You know what I mean? And kids love it. Kids really do, but they need to be given the space. Not only with the tools that they're using, but also the proper, nourishing environment from a teacher, the class itself, the space that it's in. All of that correlates to how a person, especially young children, experience their creativity. Coming from the public school system, it's very dicey on how creativity is taught. It's, in my opinion, much more focused on memorization, very basic projects that kind of uniformly don't allow students to really express themselves in some capacity. And so I think what really is advantageous about alternative forms of education, either whether it be after school programs or even YouTube content, there's an opportunity for kids to find out new ways of expressing themselves and finding the spaces to do that safely and in a way that encourages them to explore that.
So the MFA in comics is fairly new, right?
Yes.
About how...
I don't know exact numbers, but I would say it probably isn't something, from what I know at least, that hasn't really
about 10,
existed.
15 years?
I would say probably less than 20 years, because up until now, there was not many schools teaching it as an MFA. There was literally, from what I remember, at least in my own memory, and I could be wrong, but... There's only about 2 schools in the United States.
Damn, really?
Yeah, that offered programs to emphasize specifically comics. There was the Cartoons, the Cartoon Institute, I believe, in Maryland, and then there's the Joe Kubert School of Art and Design, which has specifically a comic books professional program. But this is like more catered towards people who want to get like established in like bigger mainstream, industry standard stuff. Whereas the other Cartoons institution is more about, diving into like more memoir stuff or very like intellectual comic stuff from like companies like Fantagraphics or like, Drawn and Quarterly, which are much more like prestigious, very intentional and very culturally, centered and, comic books such as things like Love and Rockets, which, or like, Mega Hex, which are on the surface very like, look like very typical comic book strips, but they're very culturally dense based on the reflections of the authors and creators. So MFA program in comics is something very new and unprecedented in history. I mean, this is something that would have been a laughingstock in the 20th century, quite honestly, especially around the time where comic books were on almost their last life during the 70s and 60s.
Do you see another like art form that's emerging? Just like you said, like somebody saying that, a comic book type of master program would be, laughable back, 20. Do you think that there's something else that's emerging that has a similarity to comics?
Yeah, I mean,
like a different art form?
I would say animation definitely has changed a lot. Animation was also a medium that was dying by the time you got into the 80s until two films changed that, which was Roger Rabbit, and then another show that was called, that was short-lived, but it was very influential for its time, which was The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse, directed by Ralph Bakshi. I mean, this is where you got most of the 90s titans that revived animation to really got their start. Tons of people worked on that show. Tons of people also worked on Richard Williams, which is a well-known animation director who was trained by the original Nine animators of Disney, was the head animation director for Roger Rabbit, and that brought a whole new interest in animation, which led to the Renaissance, the Disney Renaissance of the 90s, which popularized animation until 3D came and hijacked the whole show. But 2D is getting much more acceptable and much more respect, I would say, now than it has been in the past. And animation in general, something that was very niche has become very popularized. I mean, look at any Marvel's credit screen, it's just full of names. People just making stuff.
Working on that film.
Oh yeah, definitely. Shout out to them.
Right. Even films like that. I mean, because Marvel came from comics, right? And that even has changed the movie scene. There's always a Marvel movie, and every month I feel like something is coming out. Every month I feel that they're just it's over polluting the film industry right now.
I would definitely emphasize the word pollute. I know this might not be a popular opinion, but quite honestly, I think Marvel superhero, not specifically Marvel, but superhero movies, the oversaturation of it, I think, is really chokeholding the art of cinema. I don't want to, come off as this, a pretentious snood, because I understand people like what they like. But as somebody who understands the history of comics and how it's kind of infiltrated, the film industry in a way, I feel that the same problems that existed for big companies like, the superhero genre are also pervading themselves or are also entering, causing the same issues in the film industry. I'm a huge, cinematic, person that was really into cinema, especially when I was in college. And, I watched a lot of movies, that most people probably wouldn't be interested or you would have to have a really specific taste in film to watch. But, I think that it's important to have films that challenge convention and that challenge, what it can be told in a story. And as much as I love superheroes, it's like, as a kid, this would have been my wish, come true. Like, there's superhero movies everywhere. And as an adult, I kind of regret that wish now, because I feel like that's all there is.
That's all there is.
And that's all that people look forward to. And the movies are all formulaic in that sense. They're as Martin Scorsese put it, it's like going through a little amusement park ride, and it's funny because when I watch the movies, I see, again, a lot of the same issues that the mainstream comics have, which is why I've largely ignored most mainstream comics, just because I feel that the independent scenes that I've been involved with, both organizing and, as a vendor, as a cartoonist selling my work, there's much more of a personalized experience with the artists that you see in these scenes, but they're not being recognized anywhere else at all for the most part. It's becoming more acceptable and much more seen than it was. But at the end of the day, the big two are telling the stories that are being told about comics, and very few other stories are being represented. And I think it's hurting, film in some sense, because if you want comics, as a medium to grow, they have to exist outside. They have to exist in their own terms too. And if they're only being represented in a film medium, if people are only consuming comic book culture through a film medium, I find it very difficult for people to find interest in reading, and it's just easier to wear a t-shirt, of Captain America and say, oh, I love the movies. And I understand people have issues with people who, talk about that. Like, well, you should just let people enjoy your stuff. I'm like, well, yeah, enjoy it. But recognize that this came from a medium that you are not participating in. You know, you are not experiencing. And I feel that it's very important to know where these characters come from and to experience where they come from, not only from a historical standpoint, but from a literary point, because I believe that is what inspires greater art, at least in the sense of something that's unformulaic, you know, and understanding what these characters were and where they come from and the history behind the creators of the story. It's funny because like it reminds me of a conversation I had with one of my students. Not the one I'm currently teaching, Mateo, but another student of mine. You know, I remember having a conversation with them about, I asked them like, hey, did you want to watch a documentary about the creator of Spider-Man since you love him so much? And they're like, no, I'm not really interested in it. I'm like, excuse me.
And who is that?
I'm not going to tell him his name. I love my students.
No. Who's the creator of Spider-Man? Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that part of me, I was like, I'm not going to shut
up. No.
I'm going to talk trash. No. I mean, that's up for debate. A lot of people debate. There's still an argument to who created Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. Two people created specifically. It was Stan Lee, obviously, and Steve Ditko.
Why does Stan Lee get all the credit for everything?
Okay, I'm going to just say it because you know what? As much as I have respect for Stan Lee for putting Marvel on the map, mm-hmm. I think that he is way overly worshipped. And if you learn a lot about...
It's a hot take, ladies and gentlemen.
It is a hot take, and right I'm going to say it because I stand by this, is that Stan Lee gets far more credit than he should. And as much as I have respect for him as far as what he had involvement with the industry... If you read more about the history of Stan Lee, you know, behind the scenes, behind the veneer, there's a lot of screwed up stuff that he did to a lot of the artists.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And, you know, I'm not going to go into details of that, but that's something I really encourage people to learn about. If anyone would want to learn about that, I'd highly recommend the book, Marvel, The Untold Story.
Ooh.
It's a great book. If anything, listen to the audiobook. But, you know, one of the biggest debates is who created Spider-Man, because Stan Lee had the concept of Spider-Man, but Steve Ditko was the one that drew the stories. You know, and
I was going to ask you that. Yeah. I've seen right now that it says that it's written by Stan Lee, but it's
but see, that's the thing, and that's the tricky thing about comics as a medium is that who is the real creator really when one person is drawing all the ideas, you know? So part of that is, you know, up for debate, but one of the reasons why I really push for comics to be existing outside of the sphere of superheroes and mainstream is because there are artists out there who are literally doing everything, writing, drawing, you know, putting it all together. And in my opinion, have much more interesting things to say than a, you know, atypical mainstream comic. But that's not to say that those comic books are valuable either. You know, superhero comics have an important place in history. It's just a matter of whose stories are we being told and how much are we seeing it and what is accepted, you know, in our culture as being the standard, you know, which I think should change, you know.
So I have two questions.
Sure.
One, so a lot of the Marvel movies, right? Going back to Marvel movies, I mean, I fall prey to the person that watches the movies and then doesn't know that there was a comic book behind it, right?
Sure.
So are a lot of the movies out? Are those existing characters already for the most part in comic books?
Well, because Disney acquired Marvel, I believe, in the 2010s, if I'm not mistaken. And, you know, with that, all their properties, all their IPs, you know what I mean? So everything you see on the screen has been created as a comic book first. All of it, you know, any character you see on there. I don't believe yet, I haven't watched Marvel movies in almost 10 years, but, you know, I believe up till now, there has not been any characters exclusively created for the movies yet. Oh, wow. Most of the characters, if not all, have all been original IPs preview, you know, something like even Black Panther was invented in the early 60s, you know what I mean, by Jack Kirby, you know, and, that was a completely different type of character of that time, very reminiscent of what it is, what wasn't as reminiscent of it is now, but those characters have existed for a long time, you know, and you know, another thing I would say too. Oh, what was your second question before I forget?
Oh, my second question was like, why do you think that they're not bridging the gap between comic books and the movies? Like, why not include the comic book into the craze of the movie and the merch?
Well, the thing is, that's the thing. You said the M word, merch. Especially since a big company like Disney who acquires a relatively big company like Marvel, the incentive isn't about the medium. It's about making as much money as possible on a popular IP. I mean, I'm not going to go on Disney, but that's the reality. You know, the reality is these companies exist to make tons and tons of money off IPs. That has always been their incentive, which is fine. My thing is, though, I don't like the fact that comics have become more of a supplementary medium to the movies as opposed to standing on their own as an art form. This isn't always the case with every comic book, you know, out there with mainstream comics. There's plenty of examples in history, even today, that stand on their own as comics. But the problem is when the comic books no longer serve as a medium that people like to experience for themselves. It's more of like, oh, I like this movie, I'm going to buy it. And you probably never read it. You'll just have it decorated in your house, which is fine. You know, I mean, no knocking on that. But recognize that there are people behind these books just putting as much labor and love, you know, as the people on the credits scroll that you watch in these movies. You know what I mean? And, you know, if comics... In comic, that's why I always encourage my students to always branch out and try reading different stuff that they're not familiar with. Reading stories about people who are either real people or other people who have different stories to tell that might not look like what you're used to. You know, because most people don't consume, I would say a good majority of people don't consume comics that are outside of the mainstream diaspora, which is of mostly superheroes, you know, and I think that's a problem.
Wait, hold on. There's other comic books besides superheroes?
Absolutely. But see, you're joking, but the thing is, that's the truth. You know, I think a lot of people forget that there exists a whole history of comic books that have been around since the early 20th century that don't have, you know, half-naked men flying in the air, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that, obviously, you know? But, you know, and also people yeah, well, like, that's the thing, too. Like, I mean, one thing I will say is that, did you know that Wonder Woman's creator was a male, for one? It was co-created by two of his polyamorous relationships. And they were a BDSM community. Whoa. So much of what Wonder Woman is now is inspired by BDSM culture. If you look at some of the early 1930s stuff. Oh, yeah, it's amazing. Like, some of the earliest stuff, if you look at it, I mean, one of my professors, shout out to Justin, you know, he's one of my, he's our gay uncle we love from CCA and our history professor. But the early comics of Wonder Woman have a lot of, you know, alludes to BDSM. You know what I mean? And yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like a lasso. Yeah, well, I mean, look at her. The lasso of truth is literally an allude to, like, you know, BDSM culture, which is, you know, like the kind of domination, you know, power dynamics that exist in BDSM culture. Like right there, below that one. No, below. Watch. Click on that one again. The one you just clicked. Click on it again one more time. Unselect it. Yeah, and then go right there to the bottom right there. This one? Yeah, this one right here. So this is a perfect example of one of her early examples of this. I mean, this is one where Wonder Woman goes on a ceremony.
I can see that now.
And if you look at it, there's a lot of, you know, like bondage in this. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of, you know, reveal to me your secrets. You know, a lot of sexual, you know, energy in these things.
All the redhead is just missing. She's just missing a ball gag.
Yeah, basically.
That's all she's missing.
And that's what's fascinating. And so the creators of Wonder Woman were able to articulate a lot of these desires and experiences through comics, because unfortunately comics is one of the few spaces that a lot of marginalized groups or, you know, communities can only express themselves. And, you know, you got goofy stuff like that, you know, Tyrannosaurus Rex and a little cage. You know,
I think that's where furries stem from Wonder Woman.
Furries actually have a very interesting
history.
Do they really? Yeah. They're, you know, furries have anamorphic characters that have existed since ancient India. What's
furries?
So furries are a subculture of people who have a love and affinity for anthropomorphic characters, which are half animal, half human-like, humanoid animals. They're often associated with, you know, sexual predatory and weird pornographic fetishes. I used to live with furries.
I had to work at the event. Okay, I didn't
know this.
Yeah,
it wasn't an invitation. It was just I had to be at that event to work. Okay,
I don't want this to get hijacked by the furry community.
No,
but I see what you're saying. Yeah,
no, it was there was a convention at the hotel that was next to the venue. and we had to set up the bars for it. And it was,
Okay.
and we had like another like small little food truck festival that was outside of it, so we had some overflow from that event. So we had some people come in their costumes and not come in their costumes, but they arrived.
They might have.
They arrived in their costumes.
Well, I will say one thing: they definitely came.
Yeah. Yeah, but
no, for sure. No.
What costume would you wear if you were part of it?
Me as a furry.
As a furry.
Both of you.
Oh my god. Okay, good. Both of us, so I don't get pigeonholed. I don't know. I would probably dress up as a hyena because then I could just laugh at everything. You know?
Oh, there we go. There we go. I'd be something with a tail.
Oh, that's pretty vague.
Yeah.
There's
No,
I'd
be a fox.
A fox?
Yeah.
Nice. So you could be the fox on the run.
Yeah. I'll be the foxy lady
so it
or
has
something.
to be something furry?
Not necessarily, right?
I mean, the furry community is a very broad, very spectrum type of community. It often gets, as somebody who used to, be furry phobic when I was a teenager and getting to know several friends of mine who were furries, in fact, I found them to be very, very amazing people. And, they get often, categorized as like weird sexual, fiends and stuff, and I would say, well, there's people like that in every community.
Yeah.
And, no community is exempt from that. But, it's so black and white to describe them as that. There's tons of people in that community that are wonderful people and they just have their interests and we just got to love them as they are. But yeah, I mean, furries have been around, since the beginning of time. If you look at early ancient, Hindu, glyphs and stuff, there's tons of alludes to, different creatures. And if you're going to write it, it's with 2 R's, not one. Yeah, you might want to be careful, though. You might get some NSFW stuff on there.
I won't put it out.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Yeah, and that's
not
the
too
thing.
bad.
No, and that's the thing. There's nothing wrong with it. What has become wrong with it is this over representation of people in that community being really screwed up.
How did they sexualize this?
I mean, I'm not an expert on it.
Anything can be sexualized.
But anything, yeah, exactly. Anything can be sexualized. Yeah. I mean, you don't even have to go to furries. I mean, if you look at Japan, their entire porn industry it doesn't stop. I mean, there's literally buildings that have 5 stories of just different types of porn. Even manga has a variety of different types of fetishes that they cater towards, in erotic comics and stuff. I'm not sure how we got here, but this is kind of hilarious.
This isn't, I was going to say, this isn't the first time that the word Japanese porn has been brought up on this podcast.
I did this one right here, look.
Yeah.
Did you be that one?
Yeah,
See?
I see that one.
Yeah.
That guy looks like Ratatouille, actually.
It does look like Ratatouille.
Yeah, what's his name? Remy.
Remy, yeah.
Yeah, that's Remy.
Oh my goodness. Oh, there's this great I forget the name of. There was this baseball announcer that was really great. His name is Bob something. There's this great audio on YouTube where he's basically talking during a game, and then between the game he's like commenting about, like on the slow side, about the furry convention that was happening across the street from the baseball game. He says one of the funniest things, one of the guys who was associated with, like, sitting with him talking about it, he says, like, so, have you ever dressed in a costume? I've never dressed in a costume, but I have worn a fig leaf or two.
Find that clip.
Oh my God.
You said it was on YouTube?
Yeah, I think it's on YouTube. Just type in Bob furry convention baseball. Like, you could just probably type it in the search.
Yeah,
right
in the
there.
search engine.
Yeah,
right
in the
there.
search right there. Bob furry baseball.
Furry baseball?
Yeah, Bob furry baseball. Yeah, it's hilarious. So, and it's just really funny how it's like, yeah, Bob Euchre. There you go, Bob Euchre, when he like actually like saw the furries. So it was pretty hilarious, like how he talks about this at
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
that one.
Yeah, he talks about it a lot in there. It's one of the funniest things I've ever heard, because it's like almost like getting like a nature show narration, but with like a baseball narrator telling you about, this is what furries do, this is what they're into,
Oh, okay.
It's hilarious. Like I couldn't believe it because I heard it from another YouTube channel. Someone had mentioned it, and I was just like, what is that? Like, I got to find out what this is. And then I'm like, who's Bob Euchre? And then I looked it up. I was like, oh. So if you want to put Bob Euchre, his last name, yeah, just type in yeah, there it is, furries right there. There it is right there. Bobby Kerfurry's in Pittsburgh. It's a pretty long clip, so I'm not sure if you want to play the whole thing, obviously, but
we'll play some
we
of
can
it.
play a part of it. Yeah, it's pretty great.
Okay.
I love this.
Too high, and it's even at a ball and a strike. People dressed up as animals. Yeah. Mm-hmm. For real. Yeah, they're wearing actual costumes, have their faces painted, and kind of a weird look, but I guess that's their thing. 1 ball and 1 strike. What do these people call themselves? Furriers? Furriers. Yeah, they're having a fur ball tonight.
Oh, really?
And from PNC
He was
Park,
having
they're
fun
way
with
far
that.
away.
It's just the way he talks, you know. Yeah. It's so funny to me.
Council waits. Here it is, and it's outside. 2 balls and a strike. You saw them this morning.
I did. I didn't know what I was looking at.
Yeah.
And I got out of there real quick like.
And they're checking in. They're, I think they're here for the next 4 days, I believe it is.
You know, he attended that thing. He knew so much about it.
Oh yeah. No, there's a picture of him. There's a picture of him literally posing with somebody from the actual convention.
Yeah.
You know, so
with his second hit in the series.
Yeah. I wonder where he was hiding his baseball. This guy.
Let's hope it wasn't a bat.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Jeez. So how much of the because I'm super into the 1960s and the psychedelic counterculture.
Yeah.
How much of that counterculture and psychedelics played a part in art?
I would say the psychedelic movement was probably, in my opinion, one of the most important contributions to American culture, but especially comics culture. You know, comics, underground comics really blossomed in the 60s because prior to that, there was really virtually no underground comics that we know of other than these pornographic comic books that were illegally distributed in the early 20th century called Tijuana Bibles. So a fun fact about comic book distribution in the early 20th century, a lot of it was money laundering from organized crime. So much of the models to which, printing comics was alluded to a lot of early, comic book industry. So if you look at Tijuana Bibles, these were some of the early remnants of, so these were sold and these were illegal. And these are also one of the first representations of underground comics because it was one of the first comic book forms that had porn in a modern context, but not porn just like anything. They would have characters of the era having sex, things like even like popular celebrities like Al Capone, and even having characters like Donald Duck and like Mickey Mouse having sex, and not just like regular hetero sex, like actual gay sex, like things like that. There's tons of that, like gay sex, lesbian sex. All of this stuff started in underground comics with these porn. I mean, again, there's a saying that it always starts with porn, and it's true in the case of underground comics. So you got these as being kind of one of the first, introductions, like right here. Like you have like a little, you just can click "Not Today" right there. Oh my God. Yeah, and then right here, it's like, oh, Minnie, I came here so we could play a little before Donald got here. Oh, Mickey, I think you're a nasty man. And it's like these were secretly sold, and as a ways to money launder a lot of organized crime. And they're considered very important. So,
where do they sell them?
So these would be sold like drugs. Like you would find a guy who knows a guy, and then, or you go to what are the speakeasies, and you might have someone hiding them under the cover, or you ask a guy like, hey, do you got any, special books on the around here or something?
Let me get a hit of acid in a TJ Bible.
Well, and that's the thing. So these were very impactful for their time. But aside from that, underground comics really took light in the 60s because in the 60s you start getting artists like Robert Crumb, who I have a lot of mixed feelings about. He was a huge deal when I was growing up, but as I've gotten older, I've had to learn to kind of rethink my relationship with his art. But there's no doubt in my mind that he had a huge impact in the industry because in the 60s you start getting, these underground movement of artists who are just saying, fuck it. Like, we're going to just, I know.
Hold on, what is that one say?
Yeah, wait, there we go. Donald Duck and Mickey right there going at it, He's got his little peener out, and Donald Duck's
Can you zoom in on that? I want to read that.
I've been trying to for like the past
I like how the furry thing is still prominent here. But see, this was drawn in the 20s, right here, like as early as the 20s. You know, and these are a part of comic history. I mean, as much as people want to deny or be grossed out,
Well, can someone read it for our guests that aren't watching it on the?
I bet I got this really sudden aim and snapped your asshole, Minnie. I'm gonna put my dick egg in you.
Donald, that tickles so good. And this has existed as porn has existed in comics and sequential art since human beings have existed. I mean, if you look at early like Hindu art, in India, there's tons of sex in it everywhere in there because you're talking about an era where polyamory was a normal part of human experience. You know what I mean? But yeah, there's tons of these comics of just all these famous like properties and IPs. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole for sure, But getting back to your question, the 60s, I would say, I know a lot of people, look at it with rose-colored glasses a lot of the time, but it was a really different time, and a lot of artists at that era were changing the game. I mean, you got guys like Robert Crumb, Spain Rodriguez, and like all these different artists emerging of the 60s who are taking LSD and just going for it, and just making whatever the hell they want, at a time where comic books were very heavily censored by, what was at the time the Comics Code, which had emerged.
What's the Comics Code?
So there's an amazing history behind that. So by the 1950s, there's a independent there's a comic book company called EC Comics. They started off as a religious comic book company. The founder of it, his name escapes me at the moment, but he started selling comic books in the 30s. And what he did was actually invent the very first saddle stitch 30-cent, like 10-cent sticker comic called the Sunday Funnies. He got a bunch of these different Sunday strips and put them together and sold them. His comic book company fell under wood. And so once his father, the character father, I believe Will Gaines, the creator, the founder of the one who picked up the mantle, he hated his dad because he didn't want to take up the comic books industry or the business, but instead he put his own stories that he wanted to see in the books. So they started off in early mid 40s, really putting stuff like what you're seeing on the screen right now, Crypt of the Tales, shock suspense stories. All these comics at the time were very groundbreaking because there was nothing like it at the time that were talking about horror stuff, creepy science fiction. And they were all inspired by different books and movies that the guys would watch, and they would come up with stories like this. The time that what's interesting about this time though, and by the time we get the 50s, these are some of the most popular, books because post-World War II, many of the readers of comic books were adult men. They were reading them in the trenches. They were interested in stories and experiences that they experienced as well, and the horrors of reality and kind of coming back to this 50s suburban nightmare, after, having things like PTSD or what they called shell shock at the time. And so, these guys are reading these comics because these are the stories they want to read, and what's brilliant about these comics is that they were very provocative at the time, very pushing the edge. One of my favorite short stories that I can't remember which one of the EC comics it was, but there is a short story about a man who comes back to a small town and he's just disgusted by his whole community that celebrates him returning because he finds out that his band of brothers, his one close friend in the trenches was black and was buried 30 miles away from the town. And so that nobody could see it. They were talking about these kind of subjects as far back as the 50s, But so what happens is in the 50s, there's this crazy psychologist named, oh my God, his name is escaping me. I just talked about it last week in my class. Sorry, excuse me. It'll come back to me. But what happened was this psychologist, he was a popular psychologist at the time because he was trying to make a name for himself in the United States. And there was a rise of a lot of juvenile delinquent crimes kind of happening in the Midwest and parts of the United States by the time you're in the mid 50s. Like things like, the books like The Outsiders are kind of like alludes to like a lot of generation of young men who are lost, at the kind of, culture that they're surmounted to in the States at this time, at a time where the communist scare is like everywhere. Everyone's afraid of the bomb. You know what I mean? There's this kind of just like this, going back into this kind of inward, culture of just like everything's hunky dory because we got a lawn and a house and a nuclear family. Yeah. And a lot of these kids hated it, and their imagination would go wild. And, with that, I feel like kids will get into like crazy stuff. But what happened was there was a situation where a young boy had basically murdered somebody. And his brother on the police report, had alluded that comic books were the cause of this violence, this outbreak of violence. Now, whether you agree with that or not.
What year was this?
This was, I believe, in 1954 or 53. And so for the first time in history, comic books were put on a congressional hearing. And Will Gaines, the owner of EC Comics, was the main target by a lot of these people attacking comic books. I mean, you're talking about a time where, by this point, one of my favorite moments is when they actually went and had a congressional hearing about this in the Senate, I believe. And they were basically badging comics and stuff like that. I mean, there's a clip I can show you guys that kind of describes what happened. If you want, go on YouTube and then type in EC Comics court. And, there's a whole clip that kind of describes to what was going on at that time. Let's see, scroll down. William Gaines. Let's go over here. Comics Code. Keep going down. There's a particular clip that I like to show you. So what's interesting about this is that let's type in Will Gaines. Can you type in Will Gaines, please? Sorry about that. I just really want to make sure we put the right clip because this clip is like perfect. Will Gaines. And there we go. And so it looks like, oh my God, the clip's not showing up. So basically, I mean, before I get into it, so like basically there was a whole, argument if comic books are causing juvenile delinquency. And he wrote this book called the Seduction of the Youth, where he alludes that comic books cause juvenile delinquency, sexual deviancy, and, very homophobic, very anti, LGBTQ.
Basically, what they did in the 90s with video games.
Basically, that's the thing. It's exactly the same thing. And they attacked it with the same vigor, that they would with the communist scare of the 1950s.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And so what ended up happening is Will Gaines went to court and tried to defend comics. But the funny thing was he was high as shit on pills. Because, pills were like a popular drug for a lot of housewives. And he was no exception to that at that time. And he was on these goofballs like crazy. He was sweating like a pig. And I felt bad for the guy when I was watching the clips, but he had some profound things to say. And
he was high as shit. That's awesome.
He was high as shit. And so he ended up losing the case, and then EC Comics was basically destroyed because they had very severely targeted. And the comic books code, to this day, by many retrospective historians, is said to be the most oppressive censorship act in American art history. Because unlike any other medium in history, comic books were heavily censored by the 1950s to a point to which all the guts, and Neil Adams, one of the guys who helped bring Batman into a whole nother level that was way different, had said it best. He says, comic books became no more better than toilet paper after that, which I agree. Like, at that point, as far as mainstream comics go. But what happened, so once that code came into play, it really fucked up the medium, because before you could have all these crazy images and, visuals and stuff, and like really get a glimpse of like, what the code did to people. And at this point, not only were people like censoring them, people were losing their jobs who were working in this industry for longer than like 30 years, since the 30s. And not only that, there were comic book burnings.
Is that him?
So that's Will Gaines.
That's him?
Will Gaines. Yeah, Will Gaines right there. He is he was basically his father had started EC Comics and he took the mantle. But he's considered a huge deal in publishing history because he really brought a lot of new stories and ideas into comics. But by the time you hit the 60s, people were, like there's a point where I want to say too, where there was comic book burnings here in the country at that time, where people were literally going out and burning comics, just like they did with Beatles records, the whole moral panics that, this nation kind of, manufactures a lot, So by the time you hit the 60s, you get a lot of these drug using hippies. And the only reason why they were only able to kind of put this art out there is because there was things like, psychedelic dungeon shops, which would be considered like, like boutique shops that sell specialty stuff, something like a bong store, or like they would sell like different jewelry or psychedelic stuff, but they would also consign underground comics.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And so that had a huge impact on, I would say, many generations, including myself, of what could be done in comics, because it reminded me, most importantly, that there's no rules in this medium. There's only possibilities. You know what I mean? And I think that, again, it kind of goes full circle with that with me, which is why I teach it, which is why I create comics, is because it's accessible, it's immediate, it doesn't require any skill. All it requires you is to have clarity. And even then, that's subjective. But you're able to put something together, you're able to create something, and really, so like here's one of the testimonies ascribed here and stuff. But it's just very interesting how this whole thing happened here. But yeah, I think that, there's a lesson to be learned with that, with censorship. And, I think about that a lot, what is acceptable, what is the line, and why are we so afraid of, children reading? It's like, basically, I remember seeing the same kind of panic with religious groups with Harry Potter becoming extremely popular.
You know what? When you were saying that earlier on, when we started about your experience with that, I had the same experience with Harry Potter growing up, and I wasn't able to watch the movies. Same. I wasn't able to read any of the books. Even like I think there was like forms that our parents had to sign, and my guardians at the time, they didn't sign any, I guess because they were talking about witchcraft, so they just wanted to warn the parents that what the kids were about to read. And I wasn't able to be a part of that assignment because I wasn't able to read Harry Potter.
There is a lot of religious groups, especially I'm going to say Charlatan, religious organizations make a lot of money off fear mongering, much like how a lot of media does, And I remember being a kid as young as like 11 watching conspiracy Christian videos about Harry Potter. There's a great one on YouTube called that I watched as a kid on VHS called Harry Potter Witchcraft Repackaged. It's hilarious because as a kid I was terrified from it, especially in the segment where they talk to real Wiccan witches about what they believe. And it's like the most terrifying thing when you're like a young Christian kid, because they're like, we believe that everybody should be available to be free and we should love everyone. And then it's like, oh my God, they don't really mean that. They're actually killing like babies inside there. And then as I got older, as someone who's a self-proclaimed bruja, I laugh now. I was like, Wiccans, they have a lot of great values. They're all about love, being one with nature, and paganism is like actually, predates Christianity by a long time. So, it's just interesting, like how, American culture, United States culture specifically, is just always been rooted in these moral panics and, religious fears. It's really rooted in the early, colonial Puritan culture that this country cultivated from its infancy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I can get into that, but that's a whole nother subject.
No, well, it translates that like into today. Like I listen to a lot of, different podcasts, even stuff on the, conservative news, about like the gay agenda and how how they're trying to feminize men, and how they're trying to get rid of men, and it's just it's weird.
Well,
it gets weird.
I'm queer, so I don't give a shit.
No, I get that, but it's just weird how they have to everything about a book, about Harry Potter. I wasn't able to read a fucking book.
It's strange, because there's this kind of contradiction to which we want kids to read, but they better be reading the right stuff. Better not be making my kids gay.
Exactly.
And I'm like, so what if your kid's gay, fool? Like, so what? I mean, they might become happier than you because you got a lot of fear.
But some of those ones that fear the most are the ones that.
Any person who is that afraid of anyone with their own sexual identity and is comfortable with it is obviously very repressed, very uncomfortable with their own sexuality and the possibility that they may not know who they are.
Do you think like over suppression will cause that?
Yeah, certainly. As somebody who grew up very homophobic and, was, very, unsure of their sexuality at a very young age and was not able to really understand or explore that at a time that was developmental for me, I think that suppressing it only makes it worse. And it's not even the fact, I think, that if you have those kind of feelings or those kind of thoughts is what makes you that way. I think it's just about accepting that those are things that human beings think about, experience. And it's okay. It doesn't mean you are suddenly gonna jump into like, excuse me, jump into like
Amber loves that, by the way.
Oh my god, I love it. I tell Go, I'm like, I can't wait till someone does it again. It's happened many times.
You gotta have like a button where you have like a buzzer when it's like burp. Hey, burp. No, but like for me, like because like I coming from a very religious family, both sides outside of my immediate family, and knowing that is very pervasive, in my own personal life and outside of it, and especially in the world that we're kind of experiencing right now with a lot of hate, towards people with a different experience of sexuality. And, I think that any person who has that much hatred and that much, fear has something to hide and has something that they don't want to know about themselves, which I think is the key to their peace and their freedom, and I think because again, when you're so culturally rooted in certain ideas, it's really hard to unsee them. I mean, I had to experience that, deconstructing the faith that I was raised with and realizing that most of the people that I'm going to be talking to, especially when I entered art school, are queer, gay, lesbian, bi, and also remembering that I grew up with, queer people my whole life, and I accepted them and loved them, but I didn't, accept their lifestyle. And I think that it was very important for me to come to terms with that and realizing how much of that sexual suppression is extremely damaging, not only to the people who are that, but the people who are afraid of it. It's less about accepting other people. It's more about accepting yourself, and I think that if you are able to at least see them as a human being first, then you can have that conversation of what you agree or disagree with. But if you have created an image of somebody based on what you have been told through a different lens that has absolutely no connection to that community, you're going to create another, image of people that will lead to their death, will lead to their violent end. I mean, African Americans know this firsthand, from just their history here in the States. You dehumanize people from an image that you create. In a mass popular depiction, or perception of it, a stereotyping and all of that. And, that dehumanizes people from the mass, observation. But that's a whole nother discussion.
We can have like 5 different podcast episodes just from.
Oh yeah. If we do it though,
Dustin.
If we do it though, I wanna do my Alex Jones impression.
Well, what you're saying about people not wanting to, dig in about their own behavior and their own mind. That's exactly how I feel about some people that don't want to, or just that don't want to try psychedelics or mushrooms because they're afraid, quotations, they're afraid of what they might see or think about in their own mind.
Did you just say the P word, my friend?
Yes, I did.
Are we going to go there?
I think I did.
Then I better bring my Alan Watts impression. No, yeah.
Do you have one? I want to hear Alan Watts.
God,
and
Alan
before
Watts.
this podcast ends, I want to hear Alex Jones and Alan Watts.
How about I do Alex Jones as Alan Watts?
Oh, wow. It's like...
You see, folks, the thing about Zen is you got to be present. The whole cycle of life is full of surprises. And I know a thing about surprises. I'm not going to lie to you. Meditation has saved my life many times. And I'm not going to forget the day that Buddha brought me nirvana. That's the way you understand the world.
No, drugs is another thing that I had to, deconstruct and really understand through research. It took me a very long time to be comfortable with, participation, and especially at a time where marijuana and, for most psychedelics were illegal.
Absolutely.
And being able to experience that, it's been a very different history timeline for me, because when I started, smoking marijuana when I was like around 21 years old, I was very indifferent to it because it was fun. It felt more like a party thing or like something you would do just to have fun. But it wasn't until I started studying the history of like, shamanism, and especially in Peru, and learning about ayahuasca and learning about, you're on a podcast if you're talking about ayahuasca. Yeah. So, but when I started,
you're on the Mind Buzz when you talk about ayahuasca, marijuana, and psychedelics, and comic books and Alex Jones.
So, the thing about psychedelics that I think has been the most important thing for me is how much their science backs up the benefits to it. I mean, when you look at how mushrooms work, how psychedelics affect your brain, and how much more positive they have an impact on you than something like that's more publicly available and much more dangerous. Excuse me. There's another burp.
There we go.
Publicly available than something like alcohol, you know what I mean? Where, again, as many cases have said, alcohol causes more deaths than most, drugs are said to be more dangerous. Like, I would say not dangerous at all, really, like marijuana and psychedelics, psychedelics have been an integral part of my life. There's me before, and then there's post, psychedelic, and I think that every human being should at least experience it if their brain is obviously compatible, because it's not for everyone, obviously,
right.
But I think the thing is the fear comes from a lot of the fear mongering because of the ability for it to expand your consciousness and to really deconstruct your reality, which, in my opinion, I'll just say it, pulls questions to power structures and systems. You know what I mean? Because if you start asking why you live this way, why we exist,
you start asking funny questions that people don't want you to ask.
I'm just asking questions here.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to stir up the soup. I'm just here to take mushrooms and find out what the truth is.
Right.
And that's kind of dangerous.
Yeah.
If you want to keep a whole society in line.
Absolutely.
And have one way of thinking at all times. Historically, in any movement that has questioned, how things operate, it has always been dismantled, especially if you look at how available psychedelics were in the 60s and how they completely...
Even the 50s, too,
Even the
dude.
50s, yeah. I mean, with the beatniks and stuff, participating in that. And, I think that it's such a natural part of human experience. If you look at any culture, especially pre-colonial cultures, it is common. It was like as essential as, fucking and eating. You know what I mean? You go out and you take a shit, you go eat, and and then you take a mushroom, and then you have like a nice little experience, and then, you go on with your day,
Right.
Sorry, I got to burp another fourth one. This is now the Burp Buzz podcast. So, I'm a huge advocate for psychedelics. I think that they do more positive than harm, but that's not to say, as I was going for, is I think that the most important thing is do them responsibly.
Absolutely.
On my Instagram, I posted several images that I did while I was on LSD. And I would say it was probably one of the most creatively positive experiences I've ever had. It really changed my whole perspective. If you want to scroll, I can point out where it is there on my feed.
Not only does he know a lot about comic books, but you're also an amazing artist, because we haven't talked about your artwork.
Oh, yeah, that.
Is a lot of your artwork, I mean, do you have art pieces pre- psychedelic?
Oh yeah, I can show you exactly where pre and then post. So if you scroll down, keep going and stuff, so you'll get to see a little bit of my body of work. There'll literally be a thumbnail.
Dude.
Yeah, so there'll literally be a thumbnail that says some LSD drawings, but you'll see those there. But yeah, so there's pre Dustin with psychedelics, and then there's post right there. So some LSD drawings right here.
Oh,
yeah.
So click on this.
Yeah,
one.
click on that, please. Yeah. So that's where you'll start seeing some of the things. So this was a very important experience.
The arrow right
me.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these were made. So these were. I was doing some work for a pitch that was going to be that was going to be part of a LucasArts venture. Unfortunately, it fell through, but I created amazing art. And the reason why is because I found out the creator, one of the artists that animated the stop motion segment of the first Star Wars movie where they're playing the chessboards and stuff. From what I heard, and you can confirm this if not, but from what I was told and I read, is that the animator for that, the stop motion animation, as you say right there, drag and draw responsibly. It was actually great because when I posted that, somebody actually thanked me for putting that.
Wow.
Because they had a friend who wasn't able to handle their psychedelics and unfortunately had committed, their own death. So it was nice to know that people, appreciated that responsible aspect of it. But one of the things that I did that for is because I really wanted to experience that, because the guy who animated for Star Wars, that segment of the chessboards, was on LSD the entire time when he was animating it. So I'm like, well. Wow. If I'm doing something related to LucasArts, I got to do LSD.
Right.
But the thing is, if you look at the brushwork on this, is that it's very visceral. It's very, instinctual. I literally felt like I was 6 years old again, in my body, less than in my mind. And I was just like going at my art at a very gut level, unprecedented before in my life. I mean, it really also, the kind of thoughts that my mind produced was more like, it became this very philosophically different thing where I was starting to see things totally different, where I realized like, why am I, because at this point I had always called myself a cartoonist. But at this point when I started, when I had this experience, it really kind of changed how I saw myself and my art. And I realized, why am I limiting myself strictly as a cartoonist? Right. Why am I only calling myself that? What if I am just an artist and I can do whatever the hell I want, and whatever I want to pick up, I can put together?
Ooh, I like this one a lot.
Yeah. So this is pre-psychedelics, but this was a series of images I did to produce for my my thesis for my MFA program. So I'm very heavily inspired by Mesoamerican history. Shout out to my homie Daniel Prada, Kush Katan on Instagram. When I used to live in the Bay Area, we used to go on a lot of walks, and we really had a lot of conversations about Mesoamerican history and how rich and deeply diverse and complex it was, especially pre-colonial. And a lot of this was inspired by that history, because one of my biggest inspirations outside of, psychedelics is research, history, learning about, ancient civilizations, which is where I take a lot of my inspiration from visually.
Yeah. Yeah, so, no, you can, it's really prominent in your artwork.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these are these pieces that you can see the final piece of this. Actually, this was a progress part. This is like a slow stream, but if you go up a little bit more, right there, this was a piece.
Which one? This one?
Yeah, that one right there. So these are a series of arts images that I still create called Humanatas.
Whoa.
So these are literally never planned. I don't plan anything on these. I just go for it. They're all instinctual. These were made at a difficult time in my life where I was trying to just be present, and they're very therapeutic for me because I'm able to just create repetitious colors, space, and images, and also kind of explore what's possible with comic book art. Because Humanatas, for me, this type of style and this type of art form for me is really more about getting my instincts present with the paper, so I'm able to kind of, get out of my mind and be at peace in my body, And I'm able to kind of articulate thoughts and ideas and all this type of stuff. So this was actually at a gallery show in Los Angeles, downtown, called The Hive. I was able to display this.
Yeah, where is this now?
So this is in my living room now. Okay. But if anyone wants it, it's for sale.
Is it?
Yeah, it's for sale. You can DM me.
I like it.
I'm glad you like it.
I'll DM you.
Please do.
I like it a lot. I just want to jump in there, honestly.
Yeah. Well, and you can also commission me. I also do this collaboratively with people. There's a whole form you can sign on my links right there. But and these pieces just became very personal. Currently, some of these pieces are also at an art gallery in Arcadia called Creative Art Worlds, which is a really great nonprofit for youth. I had a show there as last couple months. It's about to end, but I just taught for them recently too with kids. It was fun. I got to dress in costume and teach comics as a
that's
character
cool
and stuff, which it was a lot of fun. And then some of this other stuff right here. So this one right here, Wallow. So this is an important book. We worked on this for 3 years with my collaborator. So I'm half Nicaraguense and I'm half Cuban. And as I said earlier, and for the first time in my life, 2 years ago, for research for the book, my collaborator took me to Nicaragua, and I had never been outside in Central America ever in my life until this book I was commissioned to make this book. And it basically follows the story of our friend Walder, who also now is currently in the States. We're helping him seek political asylum since he was becoming very oppressed in Nicaragua at the time. And it's basically about his experiences as being a migrant worker in the second poorest nation in the entire Western Hemisphere, second to Haiti. I was able to visit where my family came from. I found my grandmother's grave there that hadn't been cleaned up in 10 years, my great-grandmother's grave.
Wow.
It was powerful to see that. I found I had long-lost family there, and all my cousins there were artists, which was tripping me out.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was crazy. We found them in Granada, and they apparently had like tons of sculptures, and like they lived on a farm, but they built stuff out of woodworks, and like one of their other kids like was drawing with charcoal and pencil. And I'm like, where were you guys all this time? Because I found that my half aunt, my grandmother's half sister was there. That's where we found her. And she was living in New Orleans for a long time, and I never knew of her existence until I went there, So.
Scroll back down. Dude, your black and white images remind me of there's this image, I can't remember, maybe we can Google search this about it's can you look it up, Amber? Yeah. It's like mushroom, look up like ancient mushroom art. Ooh. Do you know which one I'm talking? I'm trying to refer to.
But I'm interested in seeing this now. This sounds like a lot of fun.
Mushroom art, and it's like this black and white, like bird looking. There we go. There he is. You see, he's right there. Right, that guy.
Wow. Are these early cave drawings?
Yeah. Look at that.
Wow.
Yeah, it looks
it's
like
similar. That's why. The first thing, like when I seen that, I was like, "Whoa, hold on."
That's fascinating. You see, yeah, and that's the thing. I really believe that mushrooms, anything that we eat really has data. It's like eating data.
Right.
We think of food and what we consume in our bodies as simply just nutrition, cells that, just become part of our bodies and then have an effect on like our bodies. But I think there's less discussion about how certain plants affect our psychology too. I mean, if you look at the kind of food that we consume in America, especially if you're constantly eating fast food, there's a lot of studies showing that it causes depression and a lot of sickness. But what's to say that you're not able to also consume something like mushrooms, and its information that it has, its consciousness as a plant, can infiltrate your brain too and give you information. I mean, just from my own personal mushroom experiences, one of the most important things that I felt under that was this conversation in my brain that would, tell me when to relax, or like, hey, you're thinking too much. Hey, don't overthink it. It's just this. It's just that, and I think about that. It's like, is that me, or is that the mushroom using its way of communicating with me? Because if you look at how mushrooms operate, they're very connected. They're very huge networks, and they have tons of data in them that is, basically, plant, material in cells and stuff. And there's so much I don't think that we're putting research on to finding out how these things connect to us not only on a psychological level, but a biological level too, especially how, when you look how mushrooms affect the brain and stuff. So that's how the way I at least describe it. And that's where I feel like art has a way for us under the influence of plants like that can really help us understand our own minds too, and our imagination, and what kind of images come to us as a species and what they represent. One of my favorite things that Terence McKenna talked about in his book, Food of the Gods, is how one of the earliest images that we see that would be considered what we call DNA strands started off as a symbol of a serpent. You know what I mean? The kind of cyclical, spiral, like the serpent as being a symbol of wisdom or a source power that was inspired by inducing psychedelics. The Peruvian shamans talk about the cosmic serpent as being one of the center things too of that, and it's something that even goes far back as ancient Persia, so I feel like early art had to have been inspired some capacity by psychedelics, because again, there's like that stone ape theory that Terence McKenna talks about, how our species, as when we were more ape-like, really became more self-aware because of the constant digestion of plants. Because if you look again with the science of mushrooms, they literally expand your brain. They literally shut down different neural pathways and compensate by creating new ones. So new ideas, new concepts, new ways of thinking emerge.
Language.
I really believe only emerged from the construction of possibly consuming psychedelics, because how else do you think about constructing these weird sounds that only we can understand and only if you can hear? And, but it's energy,
Wait, is your name GILL? This is story of my life.
Oh my God. Now you got two of us now. Oh my goodness. Double down with the mushroom.
There's two.
Well, and that's the thing. That's the thing now, and I think it's very important, for us to take this stuff seriously. That said, I do not condone this type of stuff consumed by youth. I think one thing I've always taught my students is that if you're going to do drugs, do them when you're older and your brain is more developed.
Yeah.
Because if you're young and you're consuming drugs on a constant basis, I cannot say that it won't have a negative. It will have a negative. I can say that it will have a negative effect to you in some
So
capacity.
you're part of that group that says that a child or even a person should do marijuana or any type of drugs after the age of 25.
Well, I 25.
They say that 25 is where your brain is actually more developed.
25 also is when supposedly your brain stops growing.
Oh, okay. It stops growing.
Yeah,
okay.
well, it stops expanding. I'm not sure. I mean, there's science to back that. I need more research on that. But like, my thing is, I just as an educator and as someone who didn't grow up taking drugs until I was in my 20s, and also seeing a lot of youth in my time teaching, because I've taught youth who have been incarcerated, who have been in juvie hall, and have worked and have sold drugs. You know what I mean? And and the thing is,
do you see a difference?
I do, because when I see youth who, especially older people who have been consuming marijuana since they were 15 years old. It does have an effect, you know what I mean?
Okay.
And I think there is an opportunity in the future, perhaps, for it to be possible, but I don't agree with it until, there's a way that is safely being used.
Right.
And quite honestly, I don't think it's necessary for young people to take, because I think because you're young and your brain is developing, there are so much more immersive ways to expand your mind, and art is one of those things. You know what I mean? I think that, and this is just, and I hate it, and I mean, it might just be because of the thing of my age, but like, I really believe that young people should really be free to learn about their own mind without any external stimulus like that. Because if you can't be strong on your own mind, at your youth and as you're developing it, I don't think that you'll be able to do that as an adult. You know what I mean? Because you're not developing that part of your brain. And drugs can kind of interfere with that, especially with adolescent brains that are impulsive, very, very risky, their brain is in a very extremes, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so there's a lot of room for addiction, to kind of take place there, because it doesn't matter the substance, doesn't matter what you take, anything can become an addiction, you know what I mean? And it's not a matter of what causes addictive behavior. It's more about why you become addicted to something. What are you going through? What you experience is causing you to depend on the substance. And I think that adolescents are much more, vulnerable to that kind of behavior, So, I mean, I'm open to the idea, but I think that,
by me asking that question, I'm not here to back behind, you should give a joint to a 12-year-old. I'm not.
Right.
Because I've been on that side.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I totally agree. I would rather have somebody give me a pencil or a pen and paper than a joint at 12 years old.
Hey man, you ever hit this shit? It's called graphite. You can make some crazy shit with this.
I wish I had Dustin here when I was 12 to give me that.
That's why I do what I do. I mean, because nobody was able to do that for me when I was young. You know what I mean? I mean,
that's good.
I mean, because I was offered lots of drugs growing up, and I never did it because of religious fear, and also I had. Because punk rock was something that was a huge influence in my life, and being in the straight edge culture for a while was like what protected me from that. It was off grounds of fear, but I think that I'm very happy that I didn't do drugs until I was way older in my life, and I'm proud of that. But I also feel like, there's a lot of kids there that's the only option that they're given,
right?
And I don't think that's right. I think that's very unethical, and I think that young people have the right to explore their imagination without dependency on substance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because a lot of youth, there's a lot of youth out there that are troubled, that are hurt, that are in pain, that are suffering, and drugs are a way out, a way to not feel, to numb. And I think that, there are so much healthier ways of doing that. And I think that people really neglect the idea of art being one of those things. We always push a lot of youth to do sports or do technology stuff. And I realized, well, how is this technology any other different addiction than it would be than any other substance? If not, as one of my great friends, Gaia Weiss said, shout out to Gaia, the internet is the most addictive substance on the planet.
Yeah,
I agree.
it is.
I mean, look at us. We're right here. We're surrounded by screens. You know what I mean? And it's not going to stop.
No joke.
And as going back to what we started, I think that, like anything, you must do it responsibly, do it with intent, do it with knowing what you're doing and why, and that requires an educator, I think, in a community that really challenges you to think differently or question everything, and research why, like it's one of the reasons why when I teach comics, like I really make sure that my students, I don't tell them that they have homework. I tell them you're doing research. This is research. You're going to find out who these artists are, what they did, and I want you to write and draw what's most important. And I feel like that's much more interesting than writing a boring ass book report that's like double spaced, and like bland white black screen, when you can just draw what mattered to you and then discuss it as a class. I mean, that's what I've done with my students in mentoring, my adolescents, is that I tell them we're not a class. We are a studio. And in the studio, we learn everything. We don't just draw. We read, we research, we think critically, we ask questions and discuss it. And you can do that with anything. It doesn't matter what the subject is. Even art has the ability to teach us stuff that seemingly seems disconnected from art, like mathematics, theory, philosophy, history. All of that stuff encompasses all existence. It's everywhere. So it's not only exclusive to it's not exclusive to just one subject.
Dustin.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming out, man.
Thanks for having me here. I'm super happy to be here. It was great.
There you go. She's got it.
Yeah, that's our cue. So this is my time to shout out, right?
Yeah, go ahead and share whatever you want to share.
If you like what you heard, please check out my Instagram. It's at Dusttoon. You can also check my website, Dusttoon, DUSTOONED. And if you have time, please check out my graphic novel, Wallow, A Central American Odyssey. We're at Wallow Comic on Instagram and wallowcomic.com. If you want to learn more about the MFA program that I was a part of, check out CCA Comics MFA. We also have a BFA program in there as well. And please support independent artists. Please support zine festivals. Please support independent comics. Please support anything that is outside the mainstream. I don't want to sound like a pretentious hipster, but it's true. The only thing that pushes the medium forward are the voices that are not heard. Also, check out this new documentary called No Straight Lines. It's based on a very award-winning anthology that one of my professors, Justin, put together. It's one of the first documentaries, if not the first, about covering LGBTQ history of comic books and their important role in our history as a society, and talking about subjects otherwise underrepresented in our community, especially in comics. So one thing I just want to say, peace, love, and prosperity, everybody. You are loved. You are blessed. Don't feel that you're alone in this world. You are here. There's a community that loves you. And that, if anything, make a comic about how you feel. Put it out there. And Inkflow Comics, unfortunately, our website's down. But we're a nonprofit. It's my nonprofit. We're currently in development right now. So, nice. And if you're interested in working with me or getting a custom art piece, check out my Humanata forum on my link on my Instagram. So thank you guys for having me here. This is the Dark Prince of Comics. We will see you until next time. Until we meet again in this universe or the next.
Peace, guys.
Peace, love, and prosperity.
Oh, wait.
No, you just let it play out. What are you doing?
I don't know.
That's why I told you to stop.
I'm new to the soundboard, guys. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, go to the picture.
What do I do now?
Go to the picture. Did you stop recording?
No, it's still recording.
Go to the intro and outro. What are you doing, girl? Bye. Bye, everybody. She's fired. Just kidding. She'll be back next week. We'll be back next week for another one. I love you guys.
Peace, love, and prosperity.
Peace out.
Thanks for listening to the Mind Buzz podcast. Subscribe to the Mind Buzz YouTube channel and watch full podcast episodes. Keep up with the hosts, guests, and upcoming events by following the Mind Buzz on Instagram @the Mind Buzz. See you on the next one.